Welcome to the episode. Before the show starts, I just want to get a few things out of the way. First, this is a t shirt my sister got me. I'm very pleased by it. She knows me well. So she got me a t shirt of my favorite Swazi queen. Now that's out the way. I just want to briefly mention a book and an article I read that are really interesting and throw light on the events we've been talking about. The first is a book by Elizabeth Eldredge. I'll put it in the show notes. It's a really long title. It took me a long time to get access to the book. I knew the book was available, but it's really difficult to find online. I eventually found a way to get it, and it's as good as I thought. And it's really good on the events in Mabudu. I wish I'd had it earlier for the other episodes, but it'll be good for writing essays. And then the second is something a little more interesting. I had no idea this existed. It's an essay by John Wright called Rediscovering the Ndwandwe Kingdom. And it is a rumination on the Ndwandwe, the lineage, on the literature, the very sparse literature on the Ndwandwe. The Ndwandwe are such an important lineage and are perhaps the most important, shall we say, kingdom for our story, particularly the early period around Ndvungunye's reign, Sopuza's reign, and then also in the evolutions within the Swazi state, the way Tandile Ndwandwe plays a decisive role in the administrative and ideological reform in the kingdom. But because of the breakup of their kingdom, the way in which the Ndwandwe royal family story was suppressed because members of the Ndwandwe royal family and the Ndwandwe people themselves were integrated or conquered by different groups, and because the ruling elites in these groups were usually quite threatened by the Ndwandwe lineage in their story was suppressed, and so we don't get a lot. And this is John Wright attempting to stitch together a story about the Ndwandwe. And I thought it was really, really excellent. And it's really helped me in an essay I'm working on and in the way in which I'm going to frame the role Tandile Ndwandwe plays in Swaziland in future episodes. And the story between the Swazis and the Ndwandwe, the different connection. So it's going to be quite relevant and a little relevant for today's episode. Today's episode will be relatively short. I want to finish with this business about the Tembe and the Mabudu and get into the Swazi. And I want to move into the period where we have the most extant literature, where we can understand the different factions that were operating in Swaziland and get into the story or Swaziland proper. Before I forget, there's also something I discovered that's really exciting and I think really quite excellent. At the University of the Witwatersrand, there is something called the Swaziland Oral History Project, where Swazis were interviewed. These interviews were transcribed and they use as research material by many historians. I think it's really quite excellent, and they tell the story of the different chieftaincies that were integrated into the Dlamini polity over time. I had absolutely no idea about that. And so much of that material is unpublished and untapped. So future researchers are going to do some interesting stuff. I look forward to reading that. Okay, getting into the story. In the previous episode, I ended off with Mangobe of the Tembe having defeated his nephew, seized the throne in a civil war, established himself as the preeminent power in Tembe land, and established the Tembe as the preeminent power in Delagoa Bay. And then he has a number of sons, and he dispatches the sons to different districts. Nkupo in the north, in Matutwane, I hope I'm pronouncing that. He dispatches his other son, Mpanyela, and then in the southeast, he dispatches Maputo. And Maputo is the principal actor in our story today because Maputo is the son who will live up to his father's legacy. Maputo is the youngest of his father's children and inherits his, shall we say, chieftaincy around the period of the late 1740s, early 1750s. This is really important because the 1750s is where the English, the Austrians, the Portuguese return to the Bay, and you have the greatest upsurge of trade in the Bay. So ivory is moving back and forth, beads are moving back and forth. And if you are an enterprising chief, you are likely to get very rich and you can raise lots of men and make a name for yourself. And so when Maputo is born, he isn't going to inherit. The person who inherits his father's chieftaincy is clearly going to be Nkupo, the oldest son. And so when he's dispatched to the north and Maputo is dispatched onto the eastern bank of the Maputo River, it is clear to him that he will not inherit his father's throne nor have the resources to properly challenge his eldest brother. But Maputo shows himself to be truly enterprising. There's a small tradition that says the Tembes would give the youngest son, or the sons who wouldn't inherit, a wife, some spears, and some cattle. The spears, of course, represent men to use to seize territory. When Maputo enters the territory that is east and a little south of the Maputo Bay, it isn't empty. You have a number of groups. You have the Kumalo, you have the Ngubane, you have the Nduli, and then there is a tradition that also sees elements of the Emalangeni and the Dlamini dynasty, the same Dlamini dynasty that today rules in Swaziland. There is a tradition that sees elements of the Dlaminis, and indeed, I don't know how credible this tradition is, elements of the Ndwandwe, as having been pushed out by the Tembe from that region. Supposedly, the Ndwandwe move first and they move furthest south until they occupy the area of Makutu Hills. The Dlamini will move into the area just east of the Lubombo, down past the slope on the littoral side. But the Ngubane, for example, find Maputo to be impressive. They do not have, shall we say, the iron necessary to make the spears that are necessary for war. And remember, Maputo's father, Mangobe, is in charge of the trade routes, so he has access to iron, he has access to the beads that allow his son to slowly integrate the Ngubane. The Ngubane come in seamlessly, they don't put up much of a fight. The Kumalo, on the other hand, attempt to resist, and over a series of bloody battles, Maputo decisively defeats the Kumalo. Many of them flee, with a certain contingent staying behind and being integrated into Maputo's kingdom. Maputo continues his war of expansion and attacks the Nduli. The Nduli, again, are around the area of Lake Sibia. Again, all of this is happening around the late 1750s, early 1760s. His father, Mangobe, is still alive at this period. So he is, on the face of it, acting on behalf of the larger Tembe kingdom. He defeats the Nduli. It is a bloody battle. He kills the men, he seizes the women, he seizes their cattle, he burns their villages. And then it would seem that he also comes up against elements again of the Dlamini who are on the eastern side. The Dlaminis at this period are led by Dlamini III. Dlamini III is the chief of the lineage. He is married to a woman called Layaga Ndwandwe. Layaga Ndwandwe is a princess who seems to have been the daughter of Langa Ndwandwe. Langa is the father of the great Zwitegalanga, of the famous Ndwandwe that I briefly mentioned in the beginning. And so this marriage indicates a certain, shall we say, relationship between the Dlamini and the Ndwandwe. And the sources I've seen go back and forth on this, between the relationship between the Dlamini and the Ndwandwe. But it seems pretty clear that there was a great deal of intermarriage over multiple generations. It seems to be clear that the Dlamini clan was a tad subordinate to the Ndwandwe clan, and we will see this as they attempt to flee from the Tembe. Then we have the period where you get between 1760 and 1762. We don't know exactly when Mabudu dies, but Elizabeth Eldredge pinpoints it between 1760 and 1762. And her work, where she pinpoints this, is of a more contemporary vintage than David Hedges, who estimates that Mabudu seems to have lived between about 1758 to 1765. So that's the best estimate we have. When Mangobe dies, his son Ngubo takes over. But Ngubo is not his father's son. He does not have a strong hand, and very soon, because of his brother's exploits on the eastern side of the Maputo, it is clear that the other brothers have established independent polities from themselves. In fact, Ngubo will start fighting a civil war against the son of his, shall we say, the son of Madomadoma. If you remember, in the previous episode, I mentioned that Mangobe launched a civil war that unseated Madomadom, who was the rightful heir of Tembe. Well, Madomadoma had a son. The son is not particularly important, but once Ngubo succeeded to his father's throne, the son attempted to return to take over the throne. Over a series of battles, Ngubo was able to defeat the son, but not decisively. And Ngubo, in fact, did not live that long. So I'm going to leave the Tembe and the Maputo story here, because I'm interested really in the Swazi story. So between about 1750 and 1770, all of this is happening in the region. The region is in flux. The Dlaminis are slowly being pushed against the Lobombo. The actions that the Dlamini takes, particularly Dlamini III, I should mention Dlamini III has a son by Layaga Ndwandwe. The son is Ndwandwe. Ndwandwe is the famous founder of the Swazi nation. In Siswati, we say Niwaga Ndwandwe, which means I am of Ndwandwe. And so he is the founder of the Swazi state. While his father is attempting to stem the blows from the Maputo and the Tembe, he hides his son at a place called Godlwago Hill. It is just south of modern Swaziland, just north of the Pongola. I'm going to put up an infographic so that you can see the area. So he hides him there in the event something happens. Dlamini also sends some of his sons and his brother over the Lubombo into modern Eshiselweni in southern Swaziland in a place called, at the time, Mlosheni. I'm pronouncing this wrong. Mlosheni. Again, I'll put up an infographic to show where that is. And so these are the initial Dlamini outriders that enter this territory. During this period in Eshiselweni, you had mostly Soto groupings. The Dlamini are mostly Nguni. So they are in Nguni aristocracy moving into Soto land. They quickly find an accommodation. So what happens once these outriders are there and Ndwandwe is hidden in Godlwago, Dlamini discovers that he cannot stand the blows he's receiving from the Tembe and then Maputo in his turn. So over time, they move on to the Lebombo mountain. And in fact, there is a tradition that sees Dlamini as being buried on the Lebombo mountain. This is particularly important. Ndwandwe, as he comes of age and as he inherits his father's mantle, attempts a migration. So he goes south and crosses the Pongola into Makutu Hills. Unfortunately, This is an area dominated by the Ndwandwe. And at this time, the Ndwandwe are perhaps the most powerful and the most eminent kingdom in the region. You have multiple kingdoms. So you have, I'll just name the most important chieftaincies. I don't think they are quite kingdoms yet in the 1780s. So you have the Ndwandwe, you have the Mtetwa, you have the small Zulus, they're very small at this time. You have the Amahlubi, you have the Cwabe, you have the Ngwane, and these are a different Ngwane. They will be made famous by a man named Matiwane. And so this is the constellation of forces, and it's a very packed area. It's very good area for pastoralists, but very packed. And so when the Ngwane move in, and I think they attempt to trade on their links with the Ndwandwe. After all, Ngwane's mother was a Ndwandwe princess, but the Ndwandwe are having none of it. They strike a blow north, kick the Dlamini out of Mabudu Hills, send them scurrying up the Pongola into modern Esterhuysen. So when the Dlamini arrive in the area of Esterhuysen, led by Ngwane, they already have outriders that arrived earlier. So when Ngwane lands, he finds that the population has been made ready for the arrival of the main chief. The other members of the Ngwane family who would arrive first had already submitted to him because he is from the main lineage. Ngwane will settle in the Esterhuysen region, and we don't really know much about him. And he's important again because he is the king that settles in what is still today modern Swaziland. And that's why in many ways the country is named for him. He occasionally wields authority on the eastern side of the Lubombo. In fact, one of his names, this comes from J.S. Matsebula. Or is it Huculus? I can't quite remember. It's Ngwane wa Mhlabatsi, or Ngwane wa Mhlabatsi. Mhlabatsi is sand, and the phrase refers to the sand you find on the ocean side, so the literal side of the Lubombo. And so that's why I'm going to leave it. We're not getting much today. We're getting Ngwane settling in modern Esterhuysen. And I think it's good to leave it here because this is where the story will really kick off with Ndwandwe, Sopuza, the importance of Zwide, Dingiswayo, the revolutionary transformations that are taking place in the region. And so tune in for the next episode. Like, subscribe, and get ready for the next episode. Thank you.